Well, we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucer. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. I'm very happy to see all of you today. You have found your way to the TLC Professional Development Series. We meet every Wednesday at noon. Last Wednesday, we actually had a cancellation. Our speaker had a family emergency right before, so we canceled. Some of you apparently didn't know that and came here anyway. I didn't even know the Zoom would work if we weren't here, but in the future, we'll be here for the first couple minutes to at least remind you that, hey, we're not meeting that day if that ever happens again. Hopefully it does not. And we're looking to get that event rescheduled in the coming future. Today's event, I'll introduce in just one second. I'd like to talk about next week first. Next week, we're going to have a presentation by Dr. Cassandra Jones about undergraduate research. This is something that a lot of us use in our classes, a lot of us use in our actual research labs. I'm very excited to hear that presentation. And I'll remind you that being part of these things, you can get a professional development certificate or even become a fellow of the Teaching and Learning Center. My colleague Noah Rankin has just dropped that information in the chat. Definitely check that out. Today, I'm super excited for an amazing event talking about narratives from first-generation students on their challenges in college, exploring teaching and learning implications. And I'm very excited for the colleagues that are going to share that. We have Dr. Rebeca Paz, Dr. Jodi Kaus, and Dr. Na Lim. And I'm very excited to turn this over to them and to hear their amazing perspectives. So without further ado, welcome.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you, Don, for just giving me a doctorate degree. I appreciate it. Doctor, by my colleagues are. So my name is Rebeca Paz, and I direct the Office of First Generation Students. And I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves next.
Hi, I'm Jodi Kaus, and I do have a doctorate, but unfortunately with the JD, they don't let us call ourselves doctors. I don't know why, but I'm the director of PowerCat Financial, which is the peer-to-peer financial education program located in the Union.
Hello, I'm Na Lim. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Personal Financial Planning. Nice to meet all of you today.
Well, thank you for those introductions. And basically, the three of us conducted a study about a year ago to find out about our first generation students' experiences. And the original intention was to find out about their experiences with financial wellness. And the survey and the results gave us a more detailed understanding of our K-State's first generation students' challenges in college. Okay? But before we get started, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land we live and learn in. As the first land grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is historically home to many native nations, including Nakaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri and Nebraska, Missouri and Kansas and Nebraska. So next slide. Quickly, as you all know, this is First Generation Student Celebration Week, and we just wanted you to bring attention to our calendar. It's right here. We have another event this afternoon. We're inducting students, and about 3 professors are going to be also inducted as honorary members. So you can go to our webpage and see more information about that. And next, please. All right, so what are we going to do today? We hope to tell you about our study and our first generation students' challenges and financial wellness that was conducted at our institution. We hope to discuss the fundings and current needs at our institution, and we also hope to engage in some discussion in exploring teaching and learning implications. First, I would like to talk a little bit about the research on first generation students, so you have some context about the student experience and their needs. And so the first big takeaway is that we all want to know that there's an equity gap between first generation college students and their continuing generation counterparts. And this statistic is across the nation. Basically 20% of first gen students versus 49% of continuing generation students graduate in 4 years. And basically 1 in 3 undergraduates, about 5 million in the United States, identify as first generation. Okay, so there's an equity gap. what happens about the students is they do not possess cultural and social capital related to higher education, because they do have a lot of social capital regarding to their families and to their communities. And so basically, as you may already know, the social capital related to higher education is a person's relationships and networks and the benefits they can accrue. Okay, so basically first-gen students may not have access to support systems in higher ed, what the other students do when they come in. And the cultural capital, it's also the knowledge in a given setting or field. So basically, it can translate into first-generation students not understanding the lingo that we use all the time. You know, we talk about CATS cash, GPA, and lots of CAT communities, and the students may be wondering, what in the world is that? And that causes them to feel a little disconnected. And so basically, because their parents did not attend the university, because their parents did not know the system, when they call home, the parents are not able to provide support, the students have to decipher the hidden curriculum. And the hidden curriculum is probably another lingo that we use in higher ed literature that translates into the knowledge of the rules and the systems that students need to navigate the university in order to be successful. Okay? So what that means is, for us, we have to assist them in navigating that hidden curriculum and decoding all these rules. Something that we really want to understand is that our students bring a lot of strengths to our campus, and they are resilient, they are diverse, they basically cut across racial boundaries, they come from all parts of life, also as sectors of society. They possess community cultural wealth, and if you want to learn more about community cultural wealth, you can check Terry Yasso's research on it, and they comprise many intersecting identities. So I would also like to underscore the importance of acknowledging this community cultural wealth, because that's a positive on our students. Next, please. Now we want to talk a little bit about the equity gap at K-State. So we talked about an equity gap at the national level. We also have an equity gap at our university. And these are the numbers from 2019 and 2020. As you can see, the 1-year retention rate between first-generation students and non-first gen is different. So there's an equity gap of 12.4 points. And then you can also look for the 4-year graduation rate, and for the 6-year graduation rate, the gaps are a little larger. Okay. So our hope is to close this equity gap. That's why we're engaging on all these lessons and learning more about first-gen students. Next.
Okay, so now I'd like to explain the data we used for our study. So we distributed a survey to about 3,800 first-generation undergraduate students at K-State through the email newsletter from the Office of First-Generation Students. And the responses were collected in the middle of the fall semester in 2021. And we collected 402 responses in total, and 356 respondents completed the multiple choice questions on the types of challenges that they are currently experiencing in college, and 277 students provided their narratives to the follow-up open-ended questions. So we use these responses for our study. And this research consists of 2 parts. So part 1 is a quantitative analysis on who experiences which type of challenges. So first-gen students is not a homogeneous group, so they have some diverse intersecting identities. So for the socio-demographic factors, we considered gender identity, race and ethnicity, age, whether they are in the traditional age group or not, and their school year, employment status, and their major. And for the types of challenges, we looked at financial difficulties, which includes late payments, working too many hours, and having student loan burden. and academic performance, which means like hard to find time for study, missing assignments, and low exam scores. And academic career decisions, which includes difficulties choosing or switching their majors, unclear career path, and the relational and social life, navigating relationships with roommates and romantic partners, feeling disconnected on campus, and lack of networks. And lastly, the physical and mental health issues, which include lack of sleep, anxiety, and depressions. So these are the part of the part 1 of this study, and the part 2 is a qualitative analysis on challenges first as students experience via their narratives. So I will briefly talk about the findings from the part 1, and Jodi and Rebecca will talk about the results on part 2. This is the sample statistics. So our samples are not that much different from our first generation undergraduate populations. So from our sample, majority were female undergraduate students and whites, and they were in the traditional undergraduate age range. And about a third of our respondents were the first year undergraduate students, and more than half reported that they were working part-time. And these are their majors. And as you see here, most frequently reported challenges were related with financial difficulties and the health issues. About 2/3 of our samples, the first generation undergraduate students, reported that they are experiencing financial difficulties or the health, physical or mental health issues. And now we will look at each socio-demographic factors and its relation to the types of the challenges. So the first one is about the types of challenges by gender. So we categorize the gender into the males and females and others who identify themselves as other than males or females. And as you see from this figure, those who identify themselves as other than males or females, they tend to report more challenges on campus, and especially for the mental and physical health issues, most of them reported that they are experiencing that challenges. And also about 80% of them reported that they experienced financial difficulties. Regarding the race and ethnicity, we also find some interesting patterns here, especially on the social and relational difficulties. While 2 out of 10 non-Hispanic Black respondents reported that they are experiencing relational and social life challenges, but about 7 out of 10 non-Hispanic others who are like the Hawaiians and the Native Indians and the multiracials, they reported that they are experiencing relational and social life challenges. And about the age group, so we divided the first generation students into the traditional age group and the non-traditional age group. And first generation students who are in the traditional undergraduate student ages tend to report challenges in most of the areas except the physical and health related issues. But the significant difference was only identified in the relational and social life challenges at a marginal level. So about 45% of first generation students whose age is between age 18 and 24 reported that they were experiencing challenges regarding relational and social life. With the school year, so about half of the first year respondents reported that they experience physical and mental health issues, but 4 out of 5 respondents who spent 5 or more years in college reported the same issues. It seems like there is a pattern that the higher school years, they experience more challenges. So considering that most efforts for the first generation student or just in general college students are spent on only for the first year students, there should be some considerations to spread the resources, available resources to the more higher ranking school year students. And the work status, so more than 60% of full-time working first generation students reported that they have relational and social life challenges, but the proportion was lower for those who are working part-time and those who are not working. And this pattern is aligned to the narratives that we collected from our first generation students, that there exists some vicious cycle, like they have some financial needs, so they work and there is no time for the study, no time for the social activities, and no time for the exercises. So those who are working, they are experiencing more challenges on campus. Lastly, there is some interesting patterns in the major and the types of challenges. So less first generation students with an education major experiences challenges regarding academic and career decisions than those who did not major in education. It seems like the education major, they have very determined career goals in campus. However, most first generation students with a business major reported that they are experiencing academic and career decision challenges than non-business major students. Okay.
All right, so this is the second part, which is the qualitative research. And this is really kind of putting the voice behind all of those numbers and the data that we found, which Dr. Lim reviewed with you. So we took those narratives, the 277, and then went through them and categorized them into 2 major themes that we saw repeated most frequently. And we'll go through each of the 8 themes. And with the slides on the themes, we've extracted maybe 1 or 2 of the actual narratives that you can read as we go through them. So go ahead, next slide. So the first major theme was that first generation students rely on loans and are paying for school and have felt a lack of that financial support from their families. So if you put yourselves in their shoes, so to speak, and you think about all of the financial burden that they're carrying and how they're trying to navigate school through that burden. You can read here one of the narratives, and we read many examples of how those first generation students are attempting to do all of that. The second major theme was the FAFSA process and the application process itself, and just navigating higher education and paying for higher education is very complex. I see that every day in my work at PowerCap Financial, and you can read statements here that really impress upon us how many students do need support and connection to information about how to get the resources that they need to pay for school, whether it be through scholarships or through applying for other aid that they may be able to get. Next slide. Also, we saw a theme around not having a chance to engage in family financial socialization as before they came to college. So then maybe their families did not discuss finances with them, or they didn't learn healthy behaviors around financial decisions. So thinking of also what they've experienced before they got to K-State regarding their finances. Next theme. So balancing was a very big theme that we read about through these narratives. I mean, they're working, they're parents, they have family, they are trying to, make new social connections and build their networks. And so it just becomes a lot for them to handle, but they're very resilient. As Rebecca mentioned earlier, they have a lot of positive attributes that help them get through all of these various things that they're balancing. Also, they frequently reported a lack of motivation or concentration because of probably a lot of those distractions that they had to deal with. And some of this may have been also from the COVID impacts that they had to navigate. So you can read here a couple of examples of how those students are feeling and things that they're trying to manage. And just, imagine them in your classroom having these kinds of situations to deal with. Next slide, please. So the connectedness is also a challenge, so that they do feel disconnected on campus oftentimes, either because of their lack of navigating the different social structures that are at a university, just finding students that they feel that they have similarities with. We're blessed to have the Office of First Generation Students on our campus that tries to provide some of those connections for students. But otherwise, I think many of these students do share that they have had some of those types of struggles. Also, though, they do have this, like we mentioned, resilience to them, and they're seeking to make their families proud, being the first in their family to pursue higher education or receive a higher education degree. They don't want to be a burden on their families, so that they're here trying to do this on their own. I was a first generation student, remember the same feeling of, I need to have a lot of jobs and make my own income so that I don't become an extra burden to my family, who's already working very hard to make sure I can get a degree. So I think these students express sort of those feelings that many of our first generation students have. The pandemic was another obviously theme throughout many of the narratives, putting a strain on many of these areas, their finances, their social connectedness, their academic performance. All of those things definitely have had an impact that we've seen in our first generation students and all of our students.
Thank you. So that was pretty much what we uncovered, and you can say there's a lot of layers to this. And specifically going back to build on what Jodi just talked about, the pandemic surfaced so many inequalities within higher ed, and I think we all discovered that through our classrooms. And then and with our students, also this also compounded on their academic performance. They lost motivation. They got discouraged. Some had to take care of siblings while trying to keep up with online classes. They experienced mental health. It was a lot. And we also know that with the pandemic, now that we are back, it's quite different from what it was before. And when we were talking among ourselves, we also want to find out, how is it for students now post-pandemic? Okay. So now what we would like to do next, please, is engage in a conversation about the teaching and learning implications based on what we learned. And so now that we have a deeper understanding of our first generation students' experiences in college, let's think about questions that may help us build inclusive classrooms, because this is about the classroom right now. So regarding sense of belonging, we all hear the word, it's a buzzword, what does it really mean? And I think the first thing is we can all agree that belonging is a basic human need, right? We all want to belong. We want to belong in the classroom. We want to belong in the residence halls. We want our friends to like you. We want our families to like you when we're in our communities. And it's just not for the students, for all of us. So how can we meet this very basic human need in an equitable way in our classroom? So we would like to engage you in conversations and ideas and let's start with the first question. How do you foster a sense of belonging in the classroom? And we would like to hear your ideas about that.
I think from one of the most very basic things that we can do is just simply tell our students that we want them there, that we're excited that they're taking our class and that we're thankful that they're taking our class, and just kind of using just kind of using those buzzwords, kind of as you said, to make those students feel that they are wanted in there, that they're not a nuisance to the instructor, and that we're there for their benefit, not just because we're there for a job or just to make money, for example.
Thank you. So you verbalize that you want them. So you want to be explicit. Thank you. Let's keep thinking more. What are really active ideas, things that we can do in the classroom to really foster the sense of belonging? And Noah, if you can help us, I don't see everybody. If somebody's raising their hand, would you let us know? Because I don't see everybody on my screen. So you guys can just.
Yes. Yes, I will monitor that, and I'll monitor the chat as well if we get anything in there. So we had a couple participants say not just wanted, but they deserve to. They passed the entrance requirements for the classes, college as a whole, so we assume they can succeed. We had another, someone said sharing your own story with students.
Yeah, sharing their own story is very powerful, especially if you are first generation. There's some research that indicates that role models that can relate to really work with persistence and belonging. So share your story, or even if you are an ally and you're not first gen, let them know. Thank you. What other ideas? I often have students who work on group projects together with me, and we all need to achieve success together. Thank you, Tom. So teamwork, and include everybody, right, in the teamwork. Empathy, okay. And how do you do that, Don? Do you mind explaining more?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the things that we've got to do is kind of take on our students' perspectives as much as we can. Things that our colleagues have already talked about are great, but I think one of the things, and this gets back to some of that social, capital, that currency, the hidden curriculum, is don't expect our students to know things we didn't teach them. I think sometimes we assume they have a certain knowledge base before they get to our class. So therefore we jump in, to the third week without realizing that our students, even if they took the prerequisites or those kind of things, who knows what they remember from those classes. So I think being empathetic to their position, being empathetic to their anxieties, talking about things like the imposter phenomenon in our classes, just being empathetic to all of the difficulties they might have in our class, and try to remove the barriers before they hit them.
Thank you so much. So don't make those assumptions, right? And I think
Right.
so true. So many of I know I make assumptions a lot, and I have to double check with myself. Any other ideas?
So I would also say even things like just learning students' names and using their names, and then really validating what it is that they say when they contribute. So when you ask those questions of students and they respond, either repeating what they say or putting it on the board or the overhead, or expanding on what they say and thanking them for contributing, and then just as a class thanking them for being there, and just making them feel like it makes a difference that they're there as opposed to when they're not there. Or if you do have a student who's disappeared, reaching out to them and saying, hey, we've missed having you in class, I'm concerned, can I do something to support you? So that they know it's not just, well, nobody cares if I'm there or not, that it does make a difference if they're actually there. And when they do speak up, that what they have to say is valid.
So thank you. Validation, and also making sure they don't feel invisible, right? Because I know that there were some students that, as you saw in the results, that they felt like they didn't belong, right? Especially the multicultural students. So because they feel invisible, because they're underrepresented. So that helping them be visible, I think it matters too. Thank you. These little things matter. Many of these things are less common than we may want to think on how classes get taught. Yes. So let's go a couple of more so that we can get to all these. These are really great discussions. What other ideas do we have?
Rebecca, I just want to point out that someone in the chat had said to infuse multicultural perspectives and diversity into the curriculum.
That is awesome. Thank you, Maite. How would you do that? Help us understand how would you do that?
Well, the classes that I teach are very specific. I teach, for example, I'm going to put a class this semester. I'm teaching the Latinx literature and culture class. So that's very specific of Latinx communities, right? But even when I'm not teaching about that community per se, let's say when I teach Spanish for health professions, I always keep in mind the students that I have and the students that want to be prepared to serve to that specific minority communities. So that's a way for students to see themselves within the majority of students which are white, right? Many of our students are Latinos or African Americans. And so they need to be included in the conversation and see themselves in the curriculum too, as they matter in this society.
You're using representation there, they see themselves represented, and that empowers them to feel like they belong.
Yes.
I do the same in my classes. So I teach a literature for children class. And so I choose books that represent lots of different groups. And so they can see those inside experiences. And then we talk about how oftentimes those narratives are missing from the literature as well. And I think it's important. Some classes do lend themselves easier than others to infuse into the curriculum, but I think if you're really creative, you can put it in any class. I also teach a business writing class, and one of the assignments that students do, a small part of it is to create a hypothetical CEO or COO. And so when they do this and they come up with names and they come up with values and behaviors, I then choose an image to go with the person. And so I just simply choose an image that both people are not white. And so students get that visual representation, and it's a very small thing, but I also add a little bit to the description of the person. And this year I added that how this person responds to microaggressions. And most of the students in my class had not heard that word. They didn't know what it was. And so we had a conversation about it. So you can get really creative with any type of class and figuring out how to discuss those things. Or in my class, we also talk about using pronouns. And when they named the CEO and COO, I said, I want for one of them to have a female or non-binary gender name and one to have male or non-binary gender name. And so it just acknowledges that exists, that is valid. And then we talk about using that in our writing as well with pronouns.
Thank you. Yes, pronouns, it's something that sometimes we don't think about, right? I certainly didn't put my pronouns on the screen, so I was totally negligent of that, but that's something very small, very basic that students can really relate to. So let's go with one more so that we have space for the other questions. Anybody else wants to add anything else? These are great ideas.
I can go. I put it in the chat, but for me, it was providing like practical constructive feedback on their assignments. Like when I was a first gen undergrad student myself, like I didn't know if I completed it in the way that the professor wanted. So I think just being very clear, like, hey, these are areas that you did really well. And things like APA formatting, like these are things I would want to review in class for students who have never maybe written in that form. So things like that.
I think that's very powerful, because remember the imposter syndrome that Don mentioned, right? If the students are feeling I don't belong, I probably did that. Having that validation, this is a strength. So we need to validate their strength. All right. Well, thank you. Well, for the sake of time, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Jodi Kaus, for the next question, which is.
All right. So our next question for discussion is, how do we support student financial well-being? And kind of, since we're talking primarily about our first generation student population, what kinds of things can you think of that would be able to help students in that way? Try not to require a textbook. Yes. And actually, I have seen a huge improvement in this area. We meet with students all the time and do financial plans and budgets with them. And when I ask what they're spending on textbooks, that number has gone down significantly over the last several years. And so I think there has been a deliberate, focus on trying to make that affordable for students. And keep the finances in mind when you're selecting whatever text you want to use. Yeah, just explaining the different resources that are available on campus to support students in their financial well-being. We have many wonderful programs. We've got our CATS cupboard, and explaining. I like to always mention that even if you're just in a hurry and can't make it back to your apartment for lunch, you could run through the CATS cupboard and grab a quick snack so that you're not starving while you're sitting in your class. Mentioning those things like that in the CATS closet that the Career Center offers for gently used professional clothing, scholarships. That's great. Obviously mentioning any kinds of scholarships that either you know of or being kind of the motivator behind creating a department scholarship to help with specific areas like technology costs, other areas of support that students may struggle with. Letting students know that scholarships can be searched for all the time, and early in the semester, they need to complete the KSN, K-State Scholarship Network application by March 15th. That's just a good reminder for all of us to share with our students. Offering extensions on deadlines if requested. Students who work a lot, yes, they may have many hours to catch up on work over the weekends, and so thinking of those deadlines.
Something else that I do is I just talk about how expensive college is so that students who can't afford it don't feel bad about it, because it's so expensive, and there are more and more students, I feel like, who are having difficulty being able to afford college and don't have the finances on their own or through parents or another support system. And so even though there are students here or there that aren't worried about paying for it, just normalizing it that it's really expensive, I think just can help them feel less alone.
Yes, explaining it's a big investment, an investment in themselves, but it is a big investment.
And also really to reiterate, to apply for the scholarships, one of the things that we learned in one of the conferences that we went to, at least that I learned, is that there's so many students that are eligible for Pell Grant that don't apply. So that FAFSA fear that they have and applying is really, really important. And something was also brought up earlier, how the need to connect student resources because they don't have that cultural capital related to higher education. And one of the best resources really is Jodi's office, right?
Yeah.
So connect the students and remind them that they can fill out the FAFSA because a lot of those Pell eligible students don't apply. That's something we uncovered in our research.
And the hidden language too. I think a lot of students hear the term priority deadline for the FAFSA and assume if they didn't get it done by then, that's too late, that they can't do it anymore. And that's not true. That's not the deadline. It's just first come, kind of first serve, wanting to get students to complete it by December 1st, but that's not the official deadline to complete your FAFSA. So kind of explaining all that to students. And if you're not comfortable talking about finances, obviously reaching out to us at PowerCat Financial. We're happy to explain any of these concepts in your classrooms as well. All right,
Okay.
let's do the next question.
Yeah, so the next question from us is, what barriers do you observe in the current classroom structures, and how we can remove those barriers? So any ideas?
So I'm gonna come at this question in a big structure way. And Rebecca, we may have shared this story with you before. If I have, I apologize, but I don't think many other people have heard it. I have a former doctoral student named Tucker Jones. Rebecca, you know Tucker, he's amazing. His dissertation was on first year students' experiences here at K-State. He ran into resistance structurally from members of his committee who are faculty members here who don't believe that first gen is a thing. They think it's just socioeconomic status or some other variable. They don't actually see the construct or the categorization as being anything useful. And I think when we're talking about structures and systems, realizing that there are people here, even at K-State, who I think does generally a very good job at acknowledging first generation status and the barriers that are there are still people here who teach classes who thinks that there is no difference and no quarter to be given for people with first generation status. There's no adjustment need to be made. And if you can't figure it out and do it, that's on you and you're destined to fail. So I do think one of the barriers that exists is that people don't buy into this. Interestingly, we just submitted an article for review that basically says, are first generation students unique? And our answer is a resounding yes for a lot of the reasons that y'all have talked about, but there are still people who need to hear that. And I think that's a huge barrier.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks for sharing. Yeah, go ahead, Rebecca. Go ahead.
Just wanted to say thank you because what the office has been trying to do is really shift the culture, right? And then look at our students from an asset-based lens. That's what we need to look at them as assets, that they have cultural wealth, that they have intrinsic motivation, that there's not a level playing field, but that we need to see the difference, right? And then I think our study really talks about the compounding stressors because of the financial need. And I can really attest to their financial need, because when students come to the office, they ask for money. And I have to say, I'm sorry, we don't have any money, right? And these are the things that you can do to get, because those that financial need really compounds. So there's a gap, and it's not because they're lazy, it's because they have all these other barriers. And so we really need to look at them from an asset-based perspective, I think. And so what if we treated every first generation student as an honor student? Can you imagine that? Because we go to the honor students, we say, wow, you're an honor student. Wow, you were going to be a lawyer. You're going to, we have all these high expectations. I think we need to still expect a lot out of them, but provide high support. But sorry, I have to just jump in.
Oh, no, it's fine. But I remember that I talked to Rebecca about my first experience at the commencement. So I'm in the College of Health and Human Science, and at the commencement ceremony, we actually celebrate the first generation students' success at the commencement. So I was very impressed with that, and it was really like an honor for them, right? They can be celebrated at the commencement because we are so proud of them, and there needs more awareness across the campus for the first generation students, I think. Okay, any other ideas about the barriers?
So in the chat, there's a comment that students who work so many hours per week don't have as much time to do the assignments and study. And the commenter thinks that's one of the most significant and ever-growing problems today. They feel like students in this situation are stuck, and the commenter can't help much because they can't give more than 24 hours a day. That's all that they have. Further, the financial aid requirements related to being full-time really make things difficult. STEM students need to drop a class, but financially they can't do so. And dropping a class they've already paid for is really discouraging too, even if it is a possibility.
Yeah, I observed this case many times in my own class too. And yeah, I discussed this stuff with my colleagues, and so we will discuss about it later but it's good to have some more flexible policies in your class. So even if they cannot keep like the regular deadlines for the assignments, if they have some flexible options that they can complete the assignment their own pace, if it's okay with the instructors, and I think it's another way that those students can be successful in the classroom. So they can set up their own expectation level, and they set up their own schedules for the class assignments. If they keep those, then I'm okay. Then that can be another way that we can help those students who are working, I think. Maybe it can be some extra work to the instructors, but yeah, for the student success, that's one option that we can consider in the classroom.
I have a question for the professors here. How about the syllabus? What do you think are some of the barriers in the syllabi that could come up that we don't know, that we don't think about?
I think one of the big things is the language. You know, you've talked about the glossary, you know, on a number of occasions, and the glossary kind of provides some information that students may not know. Even the word syllabus itself is a weird sounding word that no one outside of academia knows what it means. So I think it's the glossary helps, the language helps. I advocate, and Noah will drop a thing in the chat about this, but I advocate for putting empathetic syllabus statements on there, letting people know that they do matter, that they do belong, letting people know that I care about them as people, providing mental health resources. You can put financial resources and those kind of things on there too. But I think the syllabus is more than just a contract about what we're going to teach. It sets the climate for our class. I like to say that the purpose of the syllabus is to inform and inspire. And I think sometimes we have to focus a little bit more on that inspiration.
Thank you. And Rebecca and Jodi, if you are okay, maybe we can discuss about this because it's related from the audience. Okay, so we prepared some promising practices that we can share with all of you here. And this is about how can we remove the barriers in the classroom. And actually we can start with the syllabus. And we can help first generation students by clarifying our expectations in the classroom. As one of the audience already mentioned, sometimes first generation students do not know what is expected in the classroom. They do not really know about like how to complete the assignments, what expectation level it is for their assignments, something like that. So from the first generation students' narratives, we heard a lot that they said that I did not know the expectations. And the college is so much different from the high school. So they do not really understand what is expected in college. And it is very important for us to clarify our expectations in the classroom. So it would be very helpful for the first generation students if we can provide very clear rubrics and provide some good sample works for their assignments, probably from like previous semester. If we find something really good sample for the assignments, we can share that with the students so they can understand what is expected in the classroom. Okay. And also use the clear and concise language. For example, like if you have a TA in your class, rather than just saying TA, it's better to say it's a teaching assistant and explain their roles in the class. So the students who do not really know about that, they can use the TAs, okay? And it's here, the Office of First Generation Students, they provide glossary of terms on their website. So it would be great if you can add this to your syllabus too, so the students can look up the glossaries. And another idea about the syllabus is like if you are a first-gen graduate, you might consider identify yourself as a first-gen graduate in your syllabus or in the class. So it can build a relatability in the classroom, okay? And as one of the audience mentioned before, include information on various university support services in your syllabus, such as Writing Center, and encourage students to seek appropriate help from there. And also explain the common classroom practices. And the research found that first generation students, they do not use office hours as much as continuing generation students do. And there were some discussions about the term office hours in higher education because some students think office hours mean that the time the professor is doing grading or preparing their classes, so it should not be disturbed. So just calling office hour as like the student hours can make changes, and inviting those who used to avoid office hours before to benefit from having a conversation with professor in their offices. And also some students might feel that office hour is only for when they have really, really serious problems in the class. So there was some ideas of like making office hours opting out instead of opting in. So that will encourage students to use more office hours. And recognize and address common occurrences. So it's also related some of the comments from the audience that we found that many first generation students work full-time or part-time and they have family obligations. So if possible, help them have various time management options. Okay. My first year mistake was to have class assignment deadline at Friday night. So I did not know many of my students work and they only have time for doing assignments during the weekends. So after I received repeated late assignments, repeated missed assignments, I recognized that I need to move the deadlines to the Sunday night and allow some flexibilities to my students. The last thing I want to mention is it's outside of the class, but we better be very inclusive when we have campus-wide events such as Family Day or Alumni Day, because our first generation students might feel they do not belong to that events and they do not belong to the activities on the campus. So that's one of the promising practice, and I will go over to, Rebecca, if you're ready.
So really quickly, I think we pretty much talked about these, and because I feel that sense of belonging is so essential. And I also feel very strongly that it's everybody's responsibility. It's the university's responsibility, but every single one of us, whether we're in our classrooms, in our offices, and our question could be, how do I foster a sense of belonging in my office, in my class? One thing that we talked about is utilizing asset-based lens practices. Let's look at our students as assets, not liabilities. Let's have growth mindsets when we talk to them. Take stock of implicit and explicit messages. Are we also sending messages of microaggression? I think one of Melissa talked about microaggressions. That happens a lot. And if that happens, are messages implicit or explicit? And what are they? Right? Are they messages of belonging or are they messages of exclusion? Let's try to understand cultural differences and maybe also become aware of our own biases, because we all are biased and we all bring our own biases. So I think we all need to check our biases too, to on the door, right? And basically leverage students' community cultural wealth. Somebody said how you validate those students. I think that's validating their cultural wealth. Those students who are resilient, let's say you're resilient, you're good, you can do this. So kind of fight that imposter syndrome. So I'm going to pass it on to Jodi because I feel that the rest we've already covered.
All right, so some other promising practices around the financial well-being support area is really increasing their education around the practical skills of managing their finances. So we have actually rolled out a pilot program this semester, a 0 credit hour financial well-being course that students can take, kind of a mini module course, either online or in person. That's been a great opportunity for students to just learn more about their financial management. Also taking advantage of that peer-to-peer model that we have here at K-State. So we have students that can help other students. So research has shown that is extremely impactful, having somebody that of their own background or age role modeling for them some healthy financial behaviors, having somebody else to talk with about any financial issues or questions. Also, when you're onboarding, when we onboard our students through orientation, first generation students, their parents and guardians may not have some of the background or knowledge about the different processes, as we've mentioned. So including them in the process and making it, multi-generational as far as the orientation process, so that all aspects of the support area for students are provided the same information as to how to navigate funding their education. And we have a comprehensive college financial planning tool that we can offer all students, and helping a first generation student really sit down and look through all the details of what it's going to look like to pay for school and the various better options, and helping them reduce borrowing, and educating. And we see kind of a swing in the pendulum right now with being student loan adverse, so not wanting to take on any student loan debt and instead working a high number of hours. But with some education, they might find that a modest amount of student loan borrowing is manageable and healthier in the long run. So kind of providing some of that knowledge and support for those decisions. And then in the College of Health and Human Sciences, they are also have established their well-being courses. So those really impact all the different aspects of student well-being. So not only financial, but social and physical and career. And so kind of supporting students through those different aspects that really impact their success here at the university, and maybe targeting first generation students to receive some of those support offerings as well, and providing students sort of the connectedness between their academic advising process and these other processes. We have embedded PowerCat Financial, for example, in Navigate now, so it's much easier for students to access support. So as they reach out to their academic advisors, they can also reach out to a financial advisor to get assistance, and trying to enhance some of those support systems for our students.
And before we leave you, we just wanted to show you some first generation student voices. As you know, yesterday we had our celebration day and we captured these voices. And we asked the students, what is one word that describes your first gen identity? And I really want to tie this, and I want you to think about our first generation students from an asset-based lens. And think about these words, that each one of them, and how they relate to their identity, because there's a strength. So we want to leave you with their voices and also their faces, because you're going to see how diverse they are.
The one word that describes my first gen identity is visionary.
Courageous. Delightful. Strong. Compassionate.
My word would be unique.
Relentless. Hispanic. Proud. Independent.
Advocacy.
Daring. Inspiring. Determination. Motivation.
Wow.
Magic. Resilient.
I would say exciting.
Dedication.
Sponge. Immigrant. Superpower.
Trailblazer.
And as you notice,
The one word that is
included first gen faculty and staff that already graduated. So do you have any questions for us?
Actually, I did. I was curious to see if you had any, like back in the slide about the health data, and how they were experiencing health concerns, whether it be physical or mental. Were there any like more details about maybe what specific types that, you know, they reported, or more specific detail of like mental health concerns?
So for the multiple choice questions, they only check whether they have any health issues or not. But in the narrative, some of the students provide some details about the health concerns. So yeah, we can definitely have more ideas by analyzing their narratives, but not from the multiple choice questions one.
And I feel that by remembering, and I cannot tell you that exactly, I remember a lot of mental health. But maybe that was related to the pandemic, because remember, this study was conducted during the pandemic. And we also realized that all these mental health issues compounded because of the financial issues. But I remember a lot of mental health. And Jodi and Hannah, I don't know if you did too, or correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you.
So we are about out of time. I want to thank our presenters for a wonderful conversation about first generation students, the barriers we face, and how we can support them. Really appreciate all the work you're doing on campus. And one of the things that these allow us to do is to expand our professional network. So if you have further questions, please reach out to our presenters today for further guidance. As always, we're going to have a post-event survey for you to potentially complete. We'd love you to do that. And I'll remind you that next week, same bad time, same bad channel, we'll have a presentation on undergraduate research by Dr. Cassandra Jones. So thank you all for being here for part of our event today, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.